I guess I could say if I hadn't found music to be my drug of choice at 11, 12 years old, I'd probably be dead. I would be dead. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And that could be from a number of things. It could be from drugs, alcohol, violence. So I went through a stage of where things just really didn't make sense. And it was really trying all of those things at a pretty extreme level for a kind of preteen, teenager. Detroit was also this amazing city for music. So I had 5 older brothers. I was exposed to some of the most amazing artists as a kid, and then going as a fan growing older. So we had Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye and the Temptations, all the Motown acts, young Michael Jackson and Jackson 5, all this like inspirational, beautiful music. And then it was also a big kind of rock and roll hub for the world.
Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Frank Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for coming onto the Global Affair. Calm in the midst of chaos. I think that this is such a poignant, relevant, important conversation, especially as we were just reflecting before we jumped on the exponential progression that we're experiencing, the advancement of the world technologically and otherwise. One thing I find myself contemplating a lot lately is unless we can find a sense of stillness within ourselves, it's going to be an extremely overwhelming world and a landscape specifically for entrepreneurs. And so I think this is an amazing place to begin. How would you encapsulate your desire to support people to find a calm in the midst of the chaos that is this world?
Well, we all experience chaos. It's the nature of the world. It's the nature of the creative force that has become the world and that we are continuing to expand into. So I think first understanding that and then finding tools or resources or practices to help us, we'd say in the ancient wisdom of the Vedic practices, to remember who we are at the center of it all and to be able to return to that regardless of what's going on around us. So that's, for some people, that's meditation. Some people it's facilitated by technology. It's natural pieces are socialization and relationship and reframe, all kinds of things that we do with reframing and the mind, and also tools like music and the way we feed our bodies, sleep, all these sort of things that give us the capacity to hold that calm regardless of the waves that are hitting the ship.
And how would you relate this to what you see as some of the most relevant global affairs that we're dealing with at the moment? Why is it important that we have these conversations around calm?
I think we could point a lot of directions. We're in a period of radical disruption. And I think that's going to increase over the next couple of years before we get a break in the sky. And so when there's a mission around calm and balance, is that it's like this pinnacle place that you find that's fixed, but it's not. It's completely dynamic. So how do you stay dynamic on a tightrope? How do you stay dynamic in the midst of a storm? What is that calm space that you can return to regardless of what's going on around you? And it's just, so whether your company is being disrupted by AI or finances, or whether you're going through some sort of thing with your body that's disruptive health or terminal illness to something not terminal, whatever, to your relationship structures, all of these things are going to continue. Some of them will escalate in certain times, some of them won't, but who you actually are inside of all that there is a constant. And so returning to that constant, I think, is key to both survival and thriving, especially self-actualization, growth.
What is that constant?
It's a great question. It's a great question.
In the mind of Frank Fitzpatrick. Yeah, exactly. In your journey, because I really agree that divinity in all of us, but I'm interested to hear your concept of that.
Right. So I will say in my mind, in my learnings, in my what's in my perspective, because I'm not trying to prescribe my perspective to other people. But there is, and I'll back off a little bit. One of the reasons we do meditation in the morning, or that's a general practice when we wake up, is because we're conscious beings and we go unconscious at night. And so we have to remind ourselves before we enter the world who we are, other than this tired body, these spinning mind. And so something within, there's a space within us, and we can look at it from many spiritual, physiological, different perspectives, but there's a space within us that's something greater than this body, than this spinning mind, than these thoughts. And we are not that. The goal is to continue to not add things, but to remember what's at the center of them. And what's this, you call it divine, you can call it universal, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you need to call it for yourself, but there's some sort of life force, generating force, the ultimate creative force that's within us and that we're part of, that is key to remember that. So we sit and remember who we are, so that when we enter into the day and the first thing that hits us is like a email that throws us into a tizzy, or some kind of challenge that we didn't expect, or some kind of pain, physical or mental, is that we know that's not who we are. So we don't couple who we are with the experience that part of ourselves is having. We're something beyond that and within that.
And what are your thoughts before we start to dive into your journey and what brought you to, I suppose, this understanding, this practice, this passion? How do you see this in sort of the context of our collective experience, that maybe the absence of reminding ourselves that we are this conscious being, and being, as a result of that, so susceptible to the chaos of life?
Well, I think in the larger collective context, it's critical, and this is a lot of your work, is for empathy. Because once we can remember who we are at that level, we actually can see others in the reflection or projection of that. And once we see others in the reflection or projection of that, that regardless how they're performing or responding, or they are physically or mentally acting in the moment, that there's something more greater inside of them that they may or may not know. They just may not have a relationship with, or at least may not have a relationship of clarity with in that moment. So in the greater collective, it allows us to look at any other beautiful divine being and not just look at the actions, the shell that surrounds them, the world that surrounds them, and know that those are just layers that have been put on top to either protect or to build or to out of the mind and out of that body. So I think it's critical. You can't do it unless you come from that position, because you'll just project the position you come from. And so once you get there, I think it changes your whole perspective of the collective. And if the whole collective could do that, we'd have a very different world. Right? So empathy is, and that's a lot in your work, and you've seen this at play, right? Self empathy and self acceptance and of others, right?
Completely, yeah. And there's definitely some assumptions that I've had to kind of begin my work with, one of them being that innately we are loving, and that we are ultimately evolving towards compassion in order to have that, I suppose, that drive and that belief to be able to go into the world and spread the message of love. There's got to be an innate sort of trust that there's a goodness that vests at the heart of every human being. And I'm curious, because I've had these debates with different guests on the show that sit on different sides of this coin. What's your view around the innate nature of a human being?
When you say the innate nature, well, I believe, again, whatever you want to call it, depending on your framing, whether, again, that be God, the universe, the divine force, life force itself, creation, that it is within all of us, and it is accessible to all of us, and it is part of everything. We are acting, we can exist from that space. I look at each of those namings and titlings kind of the same essence, of the same essential nature from which we come, right? So I don't know what you want more beliefs around that, but I'm happy to answer. So if that didn't, yeah.
Well, there are no right or wrong answer, just your perspective on it. Is it something that you've found to believe that every human at the core is compassionate over, say, selfish?
Well, that's a mix. So I have mixed perceptions on that, because I would like to believe that everyone is ultimately in a space in this lifetime. So I look at the soul passing through many lifetimes as in a space in this lifetime of which they are acting in the higher good of all and themselves. I don't think that's necessarily 100% true. I do believe that there are people who are going through a part of their soul's journey that are acting in from a different experience. It doesn't mean that they don't have a soul and they're not going to enter a different evolution of that journey, or that soul's journey, but they might not be in it in this lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. But ultimately, there's an evolution towards a kinder way of being.
Yes, there's an evolution towards organized systems, whether it's environment, nature, the brain. They all try to bring themselves towards a state of equilibrium and to order some sort of order. So I believe that as being part of a larger system and our system, and also that journey is to go through whatever we need to do to learn to bring us to that greater order, right? So, but it might not just be up the escalator. So it might be a few turns along the way. So is that part of their intention? Is that part of their soul's intent? I don't know. You get into a question, but that's what I believe. I don't believe that everybody's operating out of the highest intention or knows or has that desire in this part of their journey.
The reason I have a curiosity around it in the context of our conversation is relating to even our pre-discussion around collective intelligence and where this evolution ultimately moves. And I like this kind of positioning that at some point chaos will move into order, and that is the natural cycle. And so what is order? I think anyone that sees the perfection of nature, it does seem that there's an underlying loving. But I'm curious, these deeper kind of spiritual contemplations in your journey, where and why and when did they begin?
Oh, a long time ago. We'll go back a few years. But before I jump there, I think chaos is part of the order. This idea that we're just going to move to this space where there's never disruption is kind of a myth that keeps us in an expectation that creates struggle. If you look at the nature itself, again, nature has storms and disruption and ice ages. It's not those cycles, and those experiences are not necessarily going to just end. But so that's why it's so critical to understand that what you're seeking to find that order, to find that is more of a deeper knowing than a waiting or a seeking for it to happen, waiting for it to happen externally. And we could speak to why chaos is part of the human journey and how that relates to creativity and why it's essential and why it's a gift as opposed to an issue. So I can come back to that if you want, but I want to answer your question. It all started for me as a kid. I mean, just basically, I grew up in Detroit. I saw pretty early, probably 4 or 5 years old, that the world was not working quite like it was. It felt like it should be working. Not that I had the right answers. And then by the time I was 11, 12, I grew up. Detroit was a phenomenal city when I was really young, and then it all crashed. I was born in the 60s and 70s. It was in the 60s. And so by the time I was 11 years old, Detroit had gone from the number one middle-class city in the world to a complete collapse, 30% unemployment, crime in the streets. My public schools were shut down. Kids at 13 were doing heroin. It was crazy.
Was it an economic downturn that caused that, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, it was a stack of things. To go in kind of quickly to the history, it was a stack of the auto industry crash, the gas crisis, we called the gas crisis at the time, and forced integration, so racial tension that led to laws that tried to force integrate to school. So 1 million people, a quarter of the population, left the city to avoid that, and those were mostly the people with money. So about 70% of the money left the city, and then political corruption at a really high level. So it was a stack of things that kind of created the perfect storm, so to say. And to this day, to which it's never recovered. So fully recovered. But for me, I was a sensitive, I was an empath, and I was HSP, and I was a creative. I was in a pretty tough environment, and it just didn't make sense. So I looked for other pathways. I kind of tried to break away from those as best I could. And some of those weren't good pathways, and some of them were better ones. And
do you want to go into that and share? I think it's always compelling to understand where someone has been and how, by contrast, that transformation has occurred in their life.
Yeah, well, I guess I could say if I hadn't found music to be my drug of choice at 11, 12 years old, I'd probably be dead. I would be dead. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And that could be from a number of things. It could be from drugs, alcohol, violence. So I went through a stage of where things just really didn't make sense. And it was really on trying all of those things at a pretty extreme level for a kind of preteen teenager. Detroit was also this amazing city for music. So I had 5 older brothers. I was exposed to some of the most amazing artists as a kid, and then going as a fan growing older. So we had Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye and the Temptations, all the Motown acts, young Michael Jackson and Jackson 5, all this like inspirational, beautiful music. And then it was also a big kind of rock and roll hub for the world to pass through. So at 11, 12 years old, I was going to see the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd one night. And then I'd go see Stevie Wonder the next night. And then I'd go see, so I was kind of bouncing back and forth between this incredible education, if not medicine, for understanding or receiving what that was like. And then at a turning point for me, when I made my decision about my life's purpose, or what has become part of my life's purpose and path, is I remember specifically laying on the floor of my parents' living room with the only pair of headphones and stereo in the house and listening to Marvin Gaye blare into my ears What's Going On, the famous song that he wrote about the Vietnam War and what was happening at the time. And it just so resonated with me, and what the power of that music and how he was contained those really powerful messages in such a beautiful bob or womb of this thing called music, right? And so I made a decision that helped me to find what we started with, is that calm in the midst of chaos. Like, who am I? Where I now feel that I'm in my body once again. I'm in my center. I'm in, like, there is something that makes sense to me. There's some sort of organized element that's come out of the human experience and human nature. And I'm listening to it, and it's permeating my body, and it's giving me some sense of personal connection and purpose. So I decided right then and there that would be what I wanted to do in the world, is how do I help all these other kids and people who are struggling in the same way to use music and other things. At that point, it was music as a resource to help them reconnect to themselves, reconnect to that divine center and that sense of purpose and who they are. So in the midst of chaos.
And you've had this incredible and esteemed career in music, and also in many ways in health. And I think it'd be incredible to kind of hear your journey in both of those ways, and how you've kind of brought them together, and now what you're working on and what you're wanting to bring to the world. But you sort of lying there on your parents' floor with the only pair of headphones and listening to Marvin Gaye. Was this really a moment of decisiveness that changed the trajectory of your life? And was it so that through that clarity you were able to break up with those more destructive behaviors, or was there kind of years to come where there was a battle between what was destructive and what was constructive?
Both. I mean, one, it was a deciding force. That was something that the music was key to my sanity and survival, and that I wanted to help other people with that. And then it was also an era of, it kept me away from the more destructive forces, but I still, probably the rest of my teenage years and going on, I was still more involved in certain alcohol and light drugs than I would wish I would have maybe been in my developmental years. But it is what it is, and I learned from it, and I learned what that means. So it's not like I turned off what was available to me. The other tools, I was still looking for other ways to cope and other ways to plant that seed about where my trajectory would take me, I guess.
What's your relationship now to those things?
Yeah, so I'm blessed in that I don't have a reliance. I might have had a little alcohol when I'm a kid, but I didn't become an alcoholic. I didn't become an addict. I didn't become any of those things. And they didn't throw me in jail for being a juvenile delinquent. So I'm freed. And I think if there was those are developmental years of your system. So if there's any damage I might have done, I believe that my health path and the learning that I had to give me compassion for others by going through that is probably what I needed to have. It's part of the teaching and learning course that becomes invaluable again in a different way.
And I think this moment of kind of enlightenment where you realize this is my dream, this is the thing that I want to dedicate my life to. So many people, if not all of us, I think if we were to really be honest with ourselves, had similar moments when we were children. Right. A recognition that this was the thing that brought us the most fulfillment, the most joy. And not everyone follows it. So why did you, and where did it take you?
Well, it's not as we say, it's a little bit of the road less traveled. And it was not because it was the easy road.
Yeah.
So for sure. And I had to many times stop and ask Spirit, is this my path? If it's my path, why is it kicking my ass? Why is this, are you really want me to keep at this again? It's like, so, and that would be either in my philanthropic work with running the organization around the world or doing however I was presenting myself, surviving Hollywood. So it's greater with a greater intention than those that surrounded me. So I think that I keep having to return to exactly the same thing. I keep having to remind myself every day, and to this day. I mean, if I enter the day without pausing in that transition from unconsciousness into consciously being present in my day, without doing ritual that involves music, meditation, movement, breath, all these, I would be controlled by the externals. But once I take control of what I remember, who I am in the internal, and what I say is each morning I invite my soul back into this body and this brain, and we carry forward for the day together. I'm a completely different person. I'm acting from a different kind of life force. That's my practice. It's as long as we're in the human experience, we're never, I guess, what's the word, released? We're never relinquished or released of being in the human experience, right? The reminding ourselves that we're not those elements that we're attached to and that we claim as suffering, that we're not the suffering. We are something more is critical to me, and what other tools can do that. And I do it with kind of a healthy cocktail, what I just mentioned.
So 1983 is when you moved to Los Angeles, and kid from Deloitte moving to LA to work for a record producer named Richard Perry of Planet Records. Was that, at the time, did you consider that your big break? Bring us into that moment.
Yeah. So
Richard Perry calls you, tells you you've got the job.
Yeah, it seemed like a big break. I guess I've had a lot of what I call breaks.
Right.
Yeah,
but take back to that moment.
And that moment was a decisive moment. I had there's a transition at that moment, I think, into that moment that's will tie into the health piece that I think you'll appreciate. But, I just put myself through college. I knew the course I was on. I was kind of following in the footsteps of Quincy Jones to become a record producer and try to serve the world through doing that at a higher level. And at the time, Richard Perry happened to be the top pop producer and Quincy was the top R&B producer. So it wasn't when he had called me to come out, I'd done some work for the Pointer Sisters because I've been producing concerts all through college, and I designed the first program at the University of Michigan for the top business school and the top music school to combine a degree between the two of them. So because I knew pretty much the path I was on at that point or what I wanted to do. And I was working again with great artists like Ray Charles, Miles Davis, Sarah Vaughan.
How old were you at that time?
18, 19, 20.
Amazing.
And then, so it was either go to New York and work on live concerts, but I was didn't like the live concert idea because it didn't have enough long tail effect. And I was looking to have more long tail effect, impact more people than a single event could do. So recordings made more sense to me. So that put me towards Hollywood, right? That put me towards how do you reach more people with the music in that. And then I got the call from Richard and it made sense. And then things dove right into the heart of, this was the 80s. So it was right into the heart of Hollywood in the 80s, which was its own form of chaos, right?
I'd love to hear your reflections on that. What was it like stepping into that world in the 80s in Hollywood? And what are your reflections now when you look at Hollywood these days comparatively?
Well, let's start with the 80s. It was its own form of chaos, but because I had...
And you were drug-free at this time, so...
Yeah, I mean, I might have been smoking some pot and drinking more than I should, but, that was the 80s, so Coke and a lot of other drugs were pretty... And they're probably most...
Every table, imagine,
right. So, yeah, like the sugar bowl on the table. But I had already kind of been through that phase. That was something we would use to study in college. It wasn't novel to me at that point. So from that perspective... And then the chaos, I think that the nature of the business is driven on this mission or to succeed or whatever that means. And so I put on a pretty good suit of armor and went at it. And then each night after I got out of the studio or out of whatever I was doing at 2 a.m. and had been through possibly a fairly brutal day, I'd go straight to the ocean and remind myself once again who I am and look out at that Pacific Ocean and go that they can take whatever they want from me, but they can't take this away from me, right? So, and then they can't take who I am away from me, and they can't take my spirit, and and they can't take this big body of water away from me. So I can
What did you
continue
feel?
on to another day, and then you go back to battle. And some of the moments, I don't mean to make it like it's all a battle, it's all chaos.
Well,
Because
it's into the theme, I think. So it's good.
but
Yeah.
but in that chaos, there's excitement and creativity. I mean, creativity is by its nature rajas, which is disruption, and is so it was a incredible time of creativity, and to be working with top artists, these brilliant artists. We were doing the Pointer Sisters Breakout LP, which was their biggest record, and a bunch of other pretty notable artists and pretty kind of top of the game stuff. It was to be working around that level of creativity and not be sucked into the darker sides of the attractions of the drugs and stuff, because I'd kind of been through that phase of my life by the time I was 21. It was good. There was a lot to come out of it. So it was exciting, as you say. It was a bit of a break in that way. And it was challenging because I was still ultimately as much of a shell as I would put on, like many of our, like being in a startup or being in the midst of Hollywood is, you have to put on a pretty thick skin. I was still a sensitive being, right? So and Hollywood's a good place to study the interaction of sensitive beings because of the number of creatives and how they interact and survive or don't, those other pressures of that chaos, right?
Do you feel that's what why many creatives historically have gone down those super destructive routes, that they're sort of innately extremely sensitive people, and on the other side of that, you have those in Hollywood that want to exploit that, want to own that, want to drive the profit that goes with that special quality in a human being?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think, yes, it's like you take a sensitive person and put them on the front line and send them off to war. They're not going to do very well as somebody who's got a different constitution and a different functioning brain type. So that's one piece of it. It's not a fun place to work. I mean, people go, "Oh, it must be so great." If you really think, the reason I didn't become a performing musician and I went towards writing and producing, because I knew the best musicians in the world from my work with, like I said, with Miles and Ray Charles, all these major artists who would collect the best musicians and to perform. And I looked at their lifestyle, which is something we don't really teach people when they go through college. And I said, well, that means at the peak of my lifestyle, provided I can be the top 0.5% of performance and breaks, I going to spend 300 nights in a different hotel room in a different city of the year, kind of just grinding away in different time zones. And so that just didn't make sense to me in my constitution, or to me in my goal of what I wanted to do. Some people love that ride, and some people it just kills them. And
it's amazing. It's amazing that you had that level of awareness, because one can only imagine the opportunities are coming at you when you're in the midst of that, and to have the centeredness to really think, what is it that I'm really wanting to create with my life, and to not be sort of enamored by all of the stimulation and possibility.
Right. Yeah, I think I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a constant reminder. It's like I never have to stop the reminding process. Like that's not me, because that's exciting, but that's not my journey, right? That's intriguing. That's exciting. I'm a curious creative. So I look down a lot of paths, but that's not my path. I mean, and why? Because again, reminding myself why I'm here, who I am, what's at the core of my being, why it's in my body. So it brings us back to that. I would say the other piece that I was going to mention about the creatives is that, because you asked, I think you were referring to the use of drugs or going down kind of darker paths of that journey. I'm not sure if I think that's what you're referring to.
Met so many of the great. Take the 27 Club as your prime candidates, some of the most talented, incredible human beings. Yeah. So
I think part of that is there's two sides of that. There's the one we just spoke about, but there's also this desire, this deep desire, find the next level, to reach another level of experience, to reach another level of embodiment, to reach another level of activity. Yeah, to see how high one can go, not just in terms of getting high, but can John Coltrane, as deep as he went into his instrument and into the music, can he get to yet a deeper place? Is there something he's yet to discover? Is there a pathway to discover that? And I think we see that today in many different paths. And so it may be something that's categorized as a drug, and it may be something that's a technology, and it may be another path. But I think the creative path is to find the road less traveled, and the one that might down at the level of nectar that you've yet to taste. And you're always trying to that will help you be able to create at another level.
It's so important what you're pointing to in this. And I can even see it through my own journey, that when there's been a momentum in my life or a doorway, a pathway to, again, kind of exponential acceleration, the tendency to want to completely get lost in that. And I've learned more than once, really, that if you do that at a pace that creates instability, there's a great price to pay. And a part of that journey has been being okay with where I am now, whilst also understanding where I want to be and want to go, and having a stable relationship between those two places and things. And I guess for anyone maybe that's listening, maybe they're going through rapid acceleration right now, or there's a series of choices that they're confronted with that they don't know if that's going to be a path that they get lost inside of and lose themselves in. How does someone really be okay with contentment so that the decisions they make can truly be conscious?
Yes. One of the things I see now, I mean, there's a lot of journeys and a lot of different cycles coming back that were in the 70s in different formats. And you see it a lot in the technology world or Silicon Valley. So, and other places. I think people have a challenging time separating peak experience from
integrated consciousness.
Yeah, and just peak potential. So you can have some peak experiences, but they don't mean that without integration or identifying with them as who you are, as opposed to a tool that you use to have a lens at who you can be or what's possible. Really understanding that differentiation so that you don't have to keep returning. It's not like there's a crime in, doing an ayahuasca journey, but if that's the only place you can find yourself, then there's a problem. So peak potential versus or optimal human potential, creative potential, however you want to describe that, is very different than just peak experience. And I think that the challenge is that people are looking for a continuous series of peak experiences. And that becomes the addictive, the darker behavior, and the emptiness coming out of it into a place that doesn't feel full, the chasing the high. So and I think that's true. Probably if I had an addiction that maybe one of the most beneficial or destructive addictions, I was a workaholic. I mean, I just used to work a lot. So, and to achieve, I thought, but you could also flip that on its head and say to avoid. So I think but I really see that today as like people not being able to differentiate, like coupling, we call it coupling in the mind, coupling their sense of happiness, contentment with a peak experience, as opposed to a peak experience allowing them a window in which they then have to integrate into who they truly are for a deeper knowing.
I love that distinction. There's a practitioner I work with, a very talented chiropractor and kinesiologist, and he's one of the ways that I make sure I'm sort of staying in alignment. And I asked him a question recently. He works with some pretty high profile individuals in Australia and internationally. Is it standard for you to work with someone who's kind of at the beginning of their journey as I am? And he said, usually people come to me at the other side of that journey when they're completely burnt out and they're looking for ways to come back home to themselves and realign. And I think that that's so true to humanity in so many ways. We wait until we've gone so far off course, chasing these things that ultimately aren't bringing us home. They're not bringing us closer to who we are. And then doing anything we can desperately to try and find our way back home, because it feels, we feel that emptiness. We feel that lack of fulfillment in those places. One thing that, my wish for humanity is to lead from that place of love, so that everything we create is an extension of the love within, so that we can never really get too lost or stray too far from what is real and authentic. Yeah. So in saying all of that, I have two questions. When was the peak in Hollywood when you were thinking, I am at the highest point in my career? And at what point did you make the decision, actually, this is not really where I want to be?
Yeah, people ask me that question often, and I'm not saying it's not a great question, but I don't really think of my journey of having a peak career-wise. I mean, I do remember early in my career, I just scored my first movie and had my first successful soundtrack, and I think I was on the verge of signing the band. And these are all things I never imagined possible as a kid, right? And I also never imagined possible that, like, I live in Santa Monica, I live near an ocean, it's beautiful. I never imagined growing up in Detroit that I would live in a place more beautiful than I'd ever gone on a vacation. So I was standing on the top of the hill at Pepperdine for some reason. Maybe for people who don't know, Pepperdine's a college along the coast, and if you stand on, they have one of the most beautiful pieces of property staring out at the Pacific Ocean. And I just remember, like, wow, I'm like beyond all my dreams. I don't really look back, and I always look at like what I've woken up to do today, or what I'm here, where I am in that journey that I'm on.
What my real curiosity is kind of at the highest, what you felt was the highest point to actually, there's a different path I want to take. The arc in your story that kind of led you to that series of decisions and awarenesses.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, there's two realizations. A couple realizations. One would be that turning point. But before that, I remember very clearly, because I remember writing about this and a friend reflecting it back to me. I remember standing and looking in the mirror, and I don't remember exactly what was the trigger for it. This was probably 2 years ago or something. And reflecting back on who I was as a kid, and I keep a picture of myself as a 4-year-old on the wall to remind me who I really am. And I go, I have become the man that the boy dreamed of. So just being able to embody that I've become in the eyes of that beautiful, innocent being who's also me and who's also in me, an actualization of that. So that's kind of a peak experience. Now that really, I looked for those resonances at a really deep level. And then two other things, I guess one is there is some peak experiences in terms of I don't do my life. Maybe this is part of the challenge of answering that question, is I don't do my life with particular goals. I do my life with particular levels of mastery. So I have some paths in which I try to achieve self-mastery, right? So creativity. So I do feel that, like, I did this project a few years ago for the Pope Francis and with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu to create a piece of music and a video piece in collaboration with Lisa Christine that the Pope opened a session at the Vatican with all the leading magistrates and judges of the world who are fighting human trafficking and modern day slavery. And these were all very frontline warriors in the battle. And so my goal was to shift their consciousness without them knowing it at the beginning of the session, and to create something that could do that. But I've learned how to do that. So, like, that's the space that, to me, and the piece was used for that. And then it was used to open Parliament at the House of Lords. And it was used to open the Harriet Tubman Freedom Museum in Cleveland. After doing all this work in film scoring and studying the human mind and studying the brain, studying how human consciousness works and working with music, to me, it's this level of mastery of bringing that alchemy together into this next level that we can use it for, that's beyond what people are fully taking ownership of and realizing what we can do in society. So those kind of peak experiences are big for me in terms of more than maybe a Grammy nomination or something like that. So, and then I can answer your pivotal point. So there's a couple, but I remember I've been a yogi of 35 years, and I was practicing in a class one morning. I had, at the time, some pretty successful films and soundtracks, and they were in a hip hop space. Two things came to mind in kind of one awakening. And one is basically that, why am I in media where I have to master something that is only good for 6 months? And then I have to go to the next, I have to start again and start again and start again. What I had been learning all these years in, like, ancient wisdom, if I just focus my energy on that, it's cumulative, so you're building upon something. So I thought I need to make a little bit of a shift here, so be aware that how much energy I'm putting into the temporary instead of the timeless. That was one piece. The other piece was, I became very clear then, and I made a decision that I can't be in integrity with my soul and information out into the world or language out into the world that doesn't serve the higher good. So, I did, like, the biggest hip hop soundtracks and working with a lot of talented artists, but some pretty amazing films at the time. But they weren't consciously creating a consciousness that I was here to represent. So at that point, I shifted and I turned down it cost me about 70% of my work in Hollywood going forward to stay in alignment regardless. And I also started a nonprofit to serve in different ways with the things that I'd learned. So that was another pivotal point. Like, I won't settle outside of my soul's purpose. I might do different ways to express it, but I won't go out of integrity with it.
If you were to bring that down to, say, one single goal that your life is about.
I still go back to the beginning of what we spoke about, is that, and I have to include, when I say help people, I have to say myself, right? Included, to find calm in the midst of chaos and to thrive in the face of challenge, like to have challenge actually be the tool, that part of the aspect that makes you thrive.
With the hope that, say, where we can transport to the future and it's the 25th century and we can look back and see how Frank's legacy impacted.
Yeah, if there's a specific way, there would maybe be two stages. Maybe the second one's less practical, but the first one is most foundational. Is I will have done something that changes humanity's relationship with knowing how we can use sound and music for human potential and our own health and well-being, and to achieve those things that I just described. Because I see a big gap there, and I don't see that many people working in to solve that. And I've been given the gifts and the knowledge in the areas that I feel responsible to do that. So I would say that bring back, and now it's in using the technologies in the area I've been working in to really bring music as medicine back into the conversation and into the practical application for each human being, and in a way that it hasn't been in 500 years. So.
In 500 years? Tell us about that. Well, where was that? Why did that change? If music was historically something that was medicinal.
So music was historically, when we were in a tribal, more community-oriented structure, music was medicine, music was connection, it was just an integrated aspect that everybody shared equally and had access to and understood in the many ways it can become a teacher, it can become a healer, that it become the chief of the tribe would be the medicine man and the musician, and all of these things would be dance would be our way to health and fulfilling ourselves, our bellies when we were hungry. All of these things, community would be built around music and movement tied to music. Everything, reverence, celebration, everything was very much, and it was just a natural piece. So there was no separations. And then the separation, when I say about 500 years ago, it's when we moved into the castle and the king had the performers perform for him. And then there was people in the audience, and we had this separation of, there's people who are performers, and then there's people who are not good enough and have to appreciate the performers who are performers, right? So we brought in, you speak about this in your journey, really kind of when you went to the art school or whatever, it's like this performance competition piece. So suddenly we have this performance competition piece where one person's more worthy than the other, right? So that was a little bit of the beginning of it, to make it simple. And then we got into a commodity path where we could start to print music and sell it. And then the composers whose music got printed were the better ones, and the other people who created music, and which was most of society, didn't fit into that path. And then that became, the technologies came around, like recorders and Victrolas, and we're still, even though we haven't really moved past the 45s, but because we're now just doing them digitally. So what we went down was, we took all these different paths of which music serves each of us and is available to us to serve ourselves, and we turned it into two paths, and one is performance and the other is commodity.
Interesting.
And the commodity's gone to zero, and we keep reinventing technologies, not to improve those other paths like health and wellness, but to return to another way to sell the 45s. And that's 500 years of 7 generations. So it basically reprograms the OS of the human mind across 7 generations. And so even the people who are deeply into medicine and care about people, or are deeply into societal structure and care about people, don't have the linking that was natural 500 years ago between music being medicine, or as music being medicine.
Fascinating. And is this part of how you think about your mission, to bring music and health back together?
Yeah, we have all the technology to use sound and music in ways that are mind-boggling for human potential and health and mental health and personalized medicine. But the big gap is it's very hard to shift the human operating system in the way people think. So, but yes, so I'm trying to crack the code of helping people shift the way people think, or having them find that pathway without having to think about it.
I love it. So, I mean, break this down for us. What would have been your discoveries? I know you explore it in your book, so we can talk about that somewhat. But the biggest kind of revelations that you've had along the way.
Yeah. So one of the bigger revelations, well, I'll first just quickly on the first book, Amplified, like Unleashing Human Potential Through the Power of Music. That was a way to bring my learnings of the last 40 years to at scale to people so they could apply it in personal ways. And I try to do things at scale, which is why I used Hollywood, because I could reach 50 million people in a shot. So now in technology, there's some amazing opportunities at the intersection of technology and health. And some of the different breakthroughs in silos of thinking is there's a lot of thinking around, besides the thinking gap we just spoke about, getting past performance and getting past performance and commodity, moving out of those as basic fundamental models for supporting the purpose of music and sound. And so the integration of sound is a continual spectrum of which music exists in the middle of the human hearing range and is the most complex because of the way the human system responds to it with the most areas of our brain and the most different areas of our nervous system and all this. And then that being a through line into inaudible, more pure applications of sound, which take us away from things like preference and conscious knowing of it. And then there's stuff that is now being developed in the way to like non-invasive brain surgery, where we can remove tremor from Parkinson's without cutting anymore or without any anesthesia, or remove without any recovery time. These kind of advances, how we can use sound. This is already happening, but it's a little bit, more futuristic for people. So we can, with nanotechnology, we can now turn biochemicals that would help the brain into nanobubbles and to carry them across sound waves, which is one of the only ways to get across the blood-brain barrier, which is why none of the treatments that are made of substance for the brain get through. And so I see ways that we'll be stacking sound and vibroacoustic, different sonic therapies to help generate stem cells, and where there's already sound in the infrasonic range that that breaks up cancer cells in the brain without hurting any other part of the brain. And when those cancer cells are broken up, they actually turn into positive proteins for the brain. So there's a lot of different areas. Ultrasound, you're going to see a lot more advances in ultrasound, where I'm advising companies in that space where we'll be doing some reconditioning with lower level, broader based ultrasound to help people with depression and trauma, and eventually improving consciousness capabilities. It's pretty exciting when you look at the whole spectrum. And then if you wanted to, like tomorrow, I wanted to start the most advanced sound and music integrated therapeutic center for, say, Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's uses all those spectrums because the music is one of the most powerful around memory, and because of the way it bridges undamaged areas of the brain to help recover memories. And then you have these other things that that are being worked on to remove plaque from the brain with ultrasound and infrasound in different areas. So the integration of those aspects is I think a big white space to be approached.
It's pretty incredible. How many other Franks are there out there working towards similar objectives in the world? Is it really an emerging space, or do you feel like you're pioneering it in a lot of ways?
Well, I'm not alone. There's people doing amazing work. Rudy Tenzi at Harvard is doing amazing work with Alzheimer's and dementia, and some of the technologies we just talked about. There's a number of people who are working in the space. It's not general practice, and in the general area of medicine, it's still looked at as a pseudo medicine. It's challenging to get funding out of.
What have been the kind of subjective and even maybe quantifiable results that you've seen, like the breakthroughs that science hasn't yet or funding at least hasn't really digested?
Well, I think you and I talked a little bit about this before. So neuroscience has been kind of the popular dogma of science for the last probably 15 years. And now we're moving in the health space into regenerative biology, which gives a lot greater path for personalized medicine and democratizing healthcare. I think where there's needs to be work and where there's a lot of great opportunities, really understanding how sound and music is working at a much more at a physiological cellular level, and being less just focused on brain synapses. They're related, so both are important. I'm trying to set up some research partnerships in that area to take that a little bit deeper, because I think there's some amazing breakthroughs, and especially when you stack them with other what we call exponentials in the health space, like stem cell and regenerative biology, and also other areas of synthetic biology for organ replacement and stuff like that. And applying integrated practices of sound and ultrasound and other sound applications that I think that there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that can be done. It's an exciting space. And I hope to give it a good kick in the butt to start it if I don't get it that far along while I'm here. So yeah.
I love it. I mean, in so many ways, I see the cross-pollination. You're obviously working to this goal through the frequency of sound, but I still see so many synergies with what we're creating with our technology, really being able to look at emotional state, which again, I see as vibrational, its frequency, and seeing how the different touch points in our day are directly influencing that energy and motion to become more conscious and kind of more intentional with what we choose day to day, and how that then correlates to the direct emotional experience and also the complex emotional patterns that are created through those habits that we engage with, often unconsciously.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You interviewed, I don't remember who it was when you were interviewing about on the AI, like the AI interview you did recently. So the Australian scientist.
Dr. Nigel.
Yes. Amazing guy, an amazing interview. So he talked about reapproaching like the way we look at AI based not upon neural networks. And we can look at sound the same way, sound and music the same way. And one of the ways, so I have an associate out of Berlin that has a company, and they basically have built sound analytic tools that do things like measure emotional state out of voice or what all these other things or disease. But what was really fascinating about it to me is that the algorithms for the coding are just based upon the physics and fundamental laws of physics and of sound itself and music theory. So there's no bias in the programming because it comes out of a natural organic structure. So it changes the whole model from us trying to, from our human mind, construct something anew as opposed to building on the natural integrated structures that already relate to our physiology, the nature, the environment we live in, our gene structure, all of these things. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at whether you're programming things for AI or just coding in general, is how do we remove those biases? Well, let's look at something that preceded before we added the biases. What's a structure we can build from?
Yeah, coming back to what is, again, kind of innate and natural.
Right.
And sort of part of my line of questions and curiosities at the beginning of this interview is, like, from my experience working with people and hearing their stories, those that do wander the path less traveled, there's the trust that what is innate within us is good. And I think that we can often, as people that have that for whatever reason, maybe it was artists that touched us and inspired us and brought us home to ourselves, or a set of life experiences that helped us wake up to that which is kind of immovable and ever present. It's the connection to nature in that way that I think creates the ultimate resilience. And when you have a connection to that, it's very difficult, if not impossible, I think, to deny it. Even going back to my practitioner, he was explaining that part of the reason practices like kinesiology are often kind of laughed at by the medical world is there's a conflict of belief in that a doctor of chiropractics and a kinesiologist, often it's based on the belief that there's an innate intelligence. That is not something that medicine has validated, confirmed. It's not taught within the construct of medicine. And I think there's a lot to be said for that in all kind of touch points of our systems. Yeah,
I agree. And it's a great perspective you give. I mean, we've been separated from our own inner intelligence so that we can give it over to those who can, manage it for their own benefit.
Outsourcing our innate intelligence. Yeah.
And I think it's the same we've done the same with music, actually. So that's part of what this 500-year journey has been, is that we've outsourced it and then we put it in something that we have to perform or be something beyond ourselves. That there's, instead of understanding that, that music is a higher form of higher intelligence already. So Howard Gardner has it in his model of the 7 intelligences, or some people attribute 9 to him. So it depends which way you look at what you've read. So,
right.
But also Beethoven said that music's a form of higher intelligence that understands humankind that we're yet to understand.
Right. It's initiating our.
Right. It's initiating. So I try to basically, every time you think about having to do music or having to play music or we tend to get stuck in this judgment of capabilities. Whereas if we just allow music like a divine intelligence to play us, there's nothing we have to do. We're just the instrument through which music is playing. And then that changes the relationship of the judgment of what we get to experience, of what's always accessible to us, no matter who we are, and that we start to feel how innate that is, and help us to reconnect to that part of our identity that we've outsourced.
Yeah, that's so incredibly valuable. There's so much wisdom in that. And this has been such a compelling conversation. What's one thing that a listener could do to begin synchronizing, moving into a place of deeper harmony?
With their relationship with music, or in general?
Yeah, let's explore that through the lens of music.
A couple exercises in the book where basically anybody who's never meditated before or ever played music before can sit at the piano and do both at the same time and let the music play them and take them into a meditative state. So that's possible to anybody. That's in there. I won't take you through the lesson. But I think in general, start with, it's like a consciousness of your relationship with music. And everybody has a very deep relationship with music. They're just not necessarily aware how to put it into practical practice to build their relationships, to build their life, to build their capacity, to build their whatever they need to build in their life. So creating playlists, what we call functional playlists that serve, I do this acronym called FIRM. So like you need to focus, make yourself a playlist that helps you focus. You need to be inspired, make yourself a playlist that is just downright going to inspire the hell out of you, regardless of what state you're in, because it will shift you out of depression. It'll shift you out of stagnation. It'll shift you out. It has on so many levels.
What would your advice in that to someone that's naturally maybe melancholy and they're naturally drawn to music, like maybe kind of acoustic music? Would you encourage them to kind of expand their repertoire, push what maybe feels natural or enjoyable to them in the beginning?
I think anything that you can do, like stretching a little bit, is always good because it allows you for an expansion into new areas of knowing yourself and knowing what you like. So I think that's good. I think but to start more foundational about what you really love. And when you listen to something, does it love you? Or is it just a perception of that it's kind of a cool experience, but it's not really loving you in a serving way. Like it's maybe speaking to a language that you don't believe, that you don't align with. It's maybe just attuned to what it's doing in your physiology, in your nervous system, because it affects every level of your physiology, your hormones, your nervous system, your neurochemicals, all of this, your mind, your mood. And so I think that the first thing is to be really clear on what you love and what you don't love. When I take people through an exercise like this, lyrics are sort of subconscious programming because a lot of people don't pay attention to them. So they are constantly programming you. So I often have them write down the lyrics and see if they agree, if they want to go to another level of what's on their playlist. But otherwise, I think just going, okay, I'm going to test this playlist in the morning because I have cloudy mornings and I have a hard time getting out of that cloud, or I have a hard time meditating. I'm going to build a playlist to play while I'm trying to sit and remember who I am, and come up with a new kind of meditation for myself or prayer, just to create specific soundtracks for specific outcomes within yourself. And then just test them, give them some time and do it. There's many other ways in terms of, we could get deeper into other practices, but I think that's probably the most foundational. And even before you stretch into exploration, although that's great, is to just find out, get back to your core. What do you love? And when you listen to it, how does it love you?
I love that. I think that's a really great question to ask. And I think we could do a whole entire other episode on, say, the EDM stuff. Yeah.
We're talking, you and I are, on many of our listeners, some not live in a kind of a privileged slice of the world, right? But sure. I've been all over the world, and as you have, and seen people who aren't in such a privileged place. And for some of those people, I would be willing to testify that music may be the closest form of unconditional love that they've ever experienced.
Believe that.
So,
and yet also someone sitting in a city penthouse by themselves, surrounded by more privilege than they know what to do with, potentially that's equally as true.
Sure. Equally as true. Sure. And so to allow yourself to be played by the music, just flip the algorithm in reverse. Stop feeling like you wish you could have to do, and allow it to play, do, hold, move you.
Yeah, what I love about that, and I think it's come through in lots of what you've shared over the past hour and a half, it's an invitation to a surrender, a softening, to letting go of control and really allowing kind of life and what inspires us to move us without the attachment, which I think is a really powerful message, an important message.
And I'm just leaving you with one more, a really simple one. And this came up a lot during COVID when people were asking me what to do, and everybody's challenged with not having exercise, movement, practice. Obviously, they were challenged by many of the mental health challenges. I said, you have 3 minutes, right? And I said, so just go find this place and do a 1-song dance. If you just do a 1-song dance once a day, I can guarantee you it's going to shift every area, every aspect of your physiology, your neurology, and your mental state. You surrender to it and just do it. So whatever that is that moves you, just because then you're doing all the practices at once. You're embodying the practice. You're doing the movement. You're getting the mitochondria going. You're getting them changing the neurochemicals. You're doing all of it at once. It's a great neuro stack, as we would say. And it's fun. So why shouldn't it be fun to do all these things? It's like there should be some joy in this process. It shouldn't just be hard work.
Of course. Well, that's Frank's challenge to all of you guys. Spend 7 days doing a 1-song dance each day and reap the benefits of that.
Yeah. See what it feels like to have the unconditional love of music. Move your body, move your heart, move your soul, move your mind.
Yeah, move into rhythm. I love it. Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you for the beautiful work you're doing through the podcast, through your organization, and just through your presence in the world. It really is. I really feel very honored to be here and with your audience and with you. Thank you.
We love it. And just before we close, what is the best way? We'll also put the links below for listeners to grab a copy of your books, support your work in any way. Yeah, probably the easiest is in my website, which is, if it's a big name, I guess, a long name, frankfitzpatrick.com. There is a website for the book, amplifiedbook.com, but you can get there if you can just remember the name, frankfitzpatrick.com. And then you also start to see some of the future work. I'm kind of coming out of a stealth mode and working at Apple for a little while, now back into the world to bring this stuff forward. So you're going to start to see some new music, some new technology, some new community, some stuff coming forward in the next few months. So it's a good time to start to tune in. Exciting stuff. Thank you for listening, my friend. If you enjoyed the show, please let us know by leaving a review or sharing the episode with someone you love and expanding this conversation as far and wide as possible. If you're looking for a community to have conversations with about global affairs, please jump in our Telegram group or join our free think tanks. Thanks for being a part of the shift towards a love-based civilization. We'll see you in the Telegram group or in the next episode.